The prairie wind carried whispers that day, whispers of duty, of promises, and of chains disguised as vows. In a small frontier town where the church bell ruled louder than the heartbeat of its people, a young woman's fate had already been decided for her. She was promised to a preacher. Her parents spoke of honor, of salvation, of how lucky she was to be chosen. They said the preacher was God's man, respected, holy, untouchable. But behind the pulpit smile and the heavy Bible he carried, there was a coldness in his eyes. He did not see her as a woman with dreams, laughter, or a soul of her own. He saw her as property, a lamb to be claimed, a name to bind to his own. The girl, no older than her early 20s, stood quietly at her family's porch each evening, watching the sun fade behind the hills, wondering if this was truly all that life held for her. She longed for freedom, for joy, for a love that would make her heart race. But her world told her love was not for choosing, it was for obeying. And then, one evening, fate placed another figure on her path. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, drawing closer until a lone rider appeared. His hat was worn, tilted low against the glare of the sun. His boots were dusty, his shirt faded from long days beneath the sky. He was no preacher, no man of the cloth. He was a cowboy, rugged, untamed, with eyes that held the horizon instead of a pulpit. The first time their eyes met, it was brief. He nodded politely as he passed her by, leading his horse to water at the edge of town. But in that moment, she felt something stir inside her, something dangerous, something forbidden. For the cowboy carried no sermons, no judgment, only a freedom she had never dared to imagine. Days passed, and each time their paths crossed, she felt the weight of her promise grow heavier. The preacher would visit her family often, speaking of their upcoming union, reminding her of her duty. His voice dripped with authority, not affection. She obeyed in silence, but inside her, a storm was building. The cowboy noticed her silence, the sadness she tried to hide. He saw the way her hands trembled when the preacher spoke, the way her smile never reached her eyes. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in fire, he found her standing alone near the well. His voice was low, gentle, but unshaken. "You deserve more than a cage dressed as a chapel," he told her. The words struck her heart like a bell ringing in the silence. No man had ever spoken to her like that, seeing her not as a possession, but as a soul longing to breathe. And though she said nothing, the look in her eyes told the cowboy one thing. This was a love worth fighting heaven for. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The preacher's presence hovered over the young woman's life like a storm cloud that never broke. Each time he visited her family's home, he spoke in long sermons about obedience, sacrifice, and a woman's place. He smiled at her parents, shook their hands, and promised them blessings in return for her hand in marriage. To them, it sounded holy. To her, it felt like chains tightening around her wrists. But destiny has a way of writing its own chapters, and one afternoon, as she carried a pail of water from the well, her path once again crossed with his. The cowboy. He was kneeling by his horse, adjusting the saddle straps, when he looked up and caught her struggling with the heavy bucket. Without a word, he stood, walked over, and took the weight from her hands. She gasped softly, startled not because of his help, but because of the gentleness in his eyes. "I can carry it," she protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you can," he replied, steady and calm, "but you shouldn't have to, at least not alone." It was such a simple exchange, but in that single moment, the wall of silence she had built around her heart cracked just enough for light to seep in. No man had ever spoken to her as though her strength and her burdens mattered. He set the pail on her porch, tipped his hat politely, and turned back to his horse. But before he left, he glanced over his shoulder, his words carrying a weight that lingered in the air. "Life's too short to spend it living someone else's choice." Her breath caught in her throat. Did he know? Could he see the promise that bound her like a shackle? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She only watched him ride away, her heart pounding louder than the preacher's sermons ever had. From that day on, their meetings began to happen more often, always by chance, or so it seemed. Sometimes at the market, when she sold eggs and butter. Sometimes on the trail when he led his cattle through town. Once, during a sudden storm when she took shelter beneath an old oak, he appeared beside her, his coat dripping wet, his horse restless in the thunder. They spoke little, but each word seemed to carry the weight of 100 unspoken truths. He asked her once if she liked to ride. She confessed she had never been allowed, that her family said horses were too wild for women. His eyes darkened at the thought, and he muttered almost to himself, "They've been keeping you caged." Her lips trembled, for it was the same word he had spoken before, cage. A word she had never dared to give voice to, though it lived in her heart every day. And slowly what began as fleeting encounters grew into moments stolen in secrecy. Under the cover of dusk, she found herself walking to the edge of the field, where his campfire burned faintly against the night. He would be there, sitting on a log, strumming a worn guitar, the melody soft, carrying across the prairie like a song of freedom. She sat across from him once, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He asked her about her dreams. No one had ever asked her that before, not her family, not the preacher. She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know. I only know I don't want this life that's been chosen for me." His gaze never wavered, his voice steady as the stars above. "Then don't take it. Dreams aren't sins. Loving what your heart chooses isn't either." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned away, ashamed of the feelings that burned inside her, feelings the preacher would call sinful, wicked. But the cowboy didn't judge her. He simply let her be, his presence more comforting than any scripture she'd ever heard. But in towns like theirs, secrets never stayed hidden for long. Gossip moved faster than the prairie winds, and soon whispers began to rise. Folks saw the preacher's promised bride walking too close to the cowboy's fire. They saw the way her eyes followed him in the marketplace, the way he lingered near her father's farm, longer than any stranger should. The preacher's gaze grew sharper with each passing day. His sermons became colder, his hand heavier when it rested on her shoulder. He reminded her of duty, of God's punishment, of the shame she would bring if she strayed, and yet, in the stillness of the night, she replayed the cowboy's words in her mind. "You shouldn't have to do it alone. Life's too short to live someone else's choice. Dreams aren't sins." Her heart battled between fear and freedom. Between the preacher's grip and the cowboy's open hand, the forbidden had already taken root. What began as chance meetings had turned into something neither of them could deny, something that would soon set the whole town ablaze with judgment. The preacher had always walked with authority. His boots struck the wooden floor of the chapel like a gavel in a courtroom, and his words carried the weight of scripture and judgment. For the townsfolk he was a man of God, revered, obeyed, and feared. But for the young woman promised to him, his presence was suffocating. The whispers had begun. She could feel them in the market, in the pews on Sunday mornings, even in her own home. Women leaned closer, murmuring behind hands. Men exchanged glances that carried both pity and suspicion. And though no one said it outright, she knew. They had seen her with him, with the cowboy. The preacher's eyes sharpened. He noticed her hesitation when he reached for her hand. He saw the way her gaze wandered beyond him, as though searching for something that did not exist within the walls of the church. And he knew. He did not yet have proof, but he knew. One evening he visited her family's home. He sat at their table, his Bible resting heavily beside his plate, untouched food before him. Her parents listened with admiration as he spoke of discipline and devotion, of how a wife's duty was to uphold her husband's honor. His tone was calm, but his eyes never left hers. "You are blessed," he said, his voice deep and steady. "The Lord has chosen this union. Do not mistake temptation for truth. A woman who strays brings shame not only upon herself, but upon her family and upon God's house." Her hands trembled beneath the table. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet his stare, yet unable to free herself from it. That night, when her parents had gone to bed, she stepped outside, desperate for air. The sky stretched wide above her, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet dark. She closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear into that endless freedom, and then she heard it, the soft strum of a guitar carried by the wind. Her heart leapt. She turned, and there he was, the cowboy, sitting by his fire at the edge of the field, his hat pulled low, his voice humming a tune as old as the plains. She walked to him, drawn as though her feet had no will of their own. When he looked up, his eyes softened. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. "I know," she whispered, "but I can't breathe in there. Not with him watching me, not with everyone watching me." He set the guitar aside and leaned forward. "They'll talk more if they see us." He'll tighten his grip. She swallowed hard, tears glistening in the firelight. He already has. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He reached for her hand but stopped just short, as though afraid his touch might break her. You don't belong to him. You don't belong to anyone but yourself. Her breath caught. No one had ever told her that before. All her life she had been told who she was, what she must do, where her path must lead. But in his words she felt a truth deeper than any sermon. The preacher, meanwhile, grew restless. His sermons grew longer, harsher, filled with warnings of sin and the fires of hell. He spoke of wolves among the flock, of false men who led women astray. Each time his gaze swept over the congregation until it rested on her, lingering just long enough to make her heart pound with fear. By the time the service ended, the town buzzed with speculation. Some whispered that the preacher's bride-to-be was faltering. Others claimed the cowboy was the devil in disguise. And some quietly, secretly hoped she would choose love over chains. Her family pressed harder. Her mother reminded her of her duty, her father of the disgrace she would bring if she disobeyed. The preacher is God's man, they said. The cowboy is nothing but dust and trouble. But in her heart the struggle raged louder than any voice. Each time the preacher spoke of punishment, she remembered the cowboy's gentleness. Each time he spoke of shame, she recalled the way freedom glimmered in the cowboy's eyes. The preacher's grip was closing in, but so too was the call of her own soul. And soon she would be forced to choose between the chains of duty and the fire of forbidden love. The nights in that small frontier town were quiet, but they were not empty. While the preacher's sermons echoed in the chapel, and townsfolk whispered their judgments, the young woman found herself walking to the edge of the fields, where the world seemed wider, freer and full of possibility. And there, under the open sky, he waited. The cowboy. Their meetings were never planned. Each time she approached, it felt like stepping into a world untouched by duty, expectation, or fear. The moonlight draped him in silver, highlighting the rugged lines of his face and the warmth in his eyes. No one else existed in those moments. Not the preacher, not her family, not the townsfolk. Just them. You shouldn't be here, she whispered one evening, though a small smile tugged at her lips. I know, he replied, tipping his hat. But it seems the stars want us to meet. Her heart fluttered. Every word, every glance, every stolen moment was a rebellion. Each secret meeting was a thread, weaving a bond that could never be undone, no matter how tightly the preacher tried to bind her in his sermons and threats. That night, she dared to speak more than she ever had. I don't even know if I can be happy, she admitted, her voice trembling. They say obedience is everything, but I feel like I'm drowning in their expectations. He stepped closer, careful not to touch her, but close enough that she felt the heat of his presence. Happiness is not obedience, he said softly. It's choice. And you have a choice. Tears pricked her eyes and she looked away. But the preacher, my parents. Everyone expects me to follow a path I never chose. His gaze was steady, unwavering. And yet here you are, choosing to be here with me. A small laugh escaped her, though it was tinged with sadness. I shouldn't feel this way. It's wrong. Wrong? His voice was incredulous. You call this wrong? Feeling alive, feeling free, feeling real. She could only shake her head, overwhelmed by the emotions she had long suppressed. He handed her a small piece of bread from his pack, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes of care and protection. The gesture reminded her that love was not about ownership, not about duty. It was about respect and presence. And slowly, as the nights passed, their bond deepened. He taught her small freedoms, how to ride a horse without fear, how to handle a rope, how to stand tall in the wind and let it carry away doubt. Each lesson was more than skill. It was empowerment. Each shared smile, each whispered word under the moonlight brought her closer to the truth she had never dared acknowledge. Her heart belonged to him, yet the shadow of reality lingered. The preacher's eyes grew sharper each time they met in town. The townsfolk watched, dissected, and whispered. Some had begun to suspect the bond, though no proof existed, and she knew that if her family ever discovered the depth of her feelings, punishment would follow, perhaps even violence disguised as righteousness. One evening, the cowboy spoke softly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. They can't chain your heart, he said. No sermon, no rule, no expectation can tell you who you are meant to love. You are free. If only you dare to take it." Her hands trembled as she reached for his, their fingers brushing for the first time. The spark was electric, a mixture of fear and longing. She knew it was dangerous yet impossible to resist. Each touch, each secret meeting, each look shared beneath the stars made the world beyond them, the preacher, the town, her family, fade into insignificance. But danger was never far. One of the townsfolk hidden in the shadows had begun to notice their meetings. Whispers turned to suspicion, and soon the preacher himself would learn of their bond. As the fire crackled between them, he leaned closer and murmured, "No matter what comes, remember this. Your heart is yours. Let heaven judge me if it must, but I want you, always." She closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep into her soul. In that moment she realized that love, no matter how forbidden, was not a crime. And while the preacher's grip grew tighter with each passing day, their secret bond had already grown too strong to break. The nights continued, carrying their laughter, their whispered confessions, and their stolen touches. And while the town slept under the preacher's watchful eyes, two hearts beat defiantly against a world that sought to control them. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the tension between duty and desire became unbearable. The preacher, growing restless and suspicious, set the wedding date. It was only a matter of time before the girl would have to step into the chapel and kneel before a man who had never loved her, never seen her as anything more than a promise kept. She walked through the fields alone one evening, the wind tugging at her skirts, twisting her hair around her face. Her heart pounded in her chest as thoughts of the impending wedding consumed her. Each sermon, each lecture from her parents, and each whispered warning from the town felt like a tightening noose. Yet beneath it all, one thought refused to leave her mind: the cowboy. He had been her secret, her escape, her courage. The memory of his gentle words and the way he had made her feel alive haunted her every moment. She could still see him sitting by the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes as he told her, "Your heart is yours. Let heaven judge me if it must, but I want you, always." That night she could not wait any longer. She rode across the fields, following the sound of the wind and the moonlight, hoping he would be there. And he was, waiting as if he had known she would come. His horse stumped quietly, the fire crackling between them, illuminating the rugged features of his face. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice was filled with desperation rather than fear. And yet, "Here you are," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I knew you'd come." Her lips trembled. "I can't marry him. I can't live that life." "But what if they find out? What if they punish me?" He reached for her hand, this time not hesitating. "Then they will see the truth. The only sin is not listening to your own heart." The preacher, meanwhile, had begun to notice the growing bond. He had caught whispers in the town, subtle movements in her eyes, the way she lingered near the edge of town at dusk. His sermons became sharper, his warnings louder. "A woman who strays brings shame not only upon herself, but upon all who love her," he proclaimed from the pulpit. Yet the girl, listening from the shadows, felt none of the fear he intended. Her heart burned with a courage she had never known. Days passed in a blur of secret meetings and anxious waiting. The preacher's grip tightened with each passing hour. He reminded her parents of their duty, questioned her obedience, and surrounded her with expectations she could no longer bear. Every glance from him was a tether, every word a chain. And then came the night before the wedding, a night that would decide everything. The town slept under a blanket of silence, unaware of the storm gathering at the edge of the fields. The girl mounted her horse, heart pounding, knowing the cowboy would be waiting. And he was. "You're taking a risk," he said, concern flickering across his face. "If they catch you, it could ruin everything." She shook her head. "I can't stay. I can't pretend anymore. I can't live for everyone else but myself." His eyes softened. "Then we ride at dawn together, no turning back." Her chest heaved with relief and fear. She had never felt so alive and so terrified at the same time. The preacher's shadow loomed over her life, yet she had chosen. A choice she had never been allowed to make before. As they prepared to leave, she turned back one last time, glancing at the house that had been both her prison and her refuge. Her parents slept, unaware of the rebellion that had already begun. She felt no guilt, only determination. Her heart had spoken, and it had spoken with the voice of freedom. The cowboy mounted first, offering her a hand. She took it, feeling the strength of his resolve flow into her own veins. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if witnessing the courage of two hearts daring to defy fate itself. And in that quiet night, under the watchful eyes of the universe, she finally felt the truth she had been searching for. Love was not to be promised, it was to be chosen. And she had chosen. Dawn broke slowly over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The town lay quiet, unaware that a storm of hearts and wills was about to erupt. The wedding day had arrived, and with it, the preacher's grip on the young woman's life seemed unshakable. His robes were crisp, his sermon rehearsed, and his eyes full of the certainty that she would walk into his arms, obedient, silent, and bound by duty. But she did not enter the chapel that morning. She had made her choice the night before, her heart and soul set on the path that had been forbidden yet undeniable. She stood at the edge of the fields, horse-saddled, wind teasing her hair, the cowboy waiting patiently beneath the rising sun. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice low but steady, the weight of the moment settling over them like a cloak. She took a deep breath, feeling the strength of her decision settle in her chest. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." His eyes softened and he extended his hand. She took it without hesitation, the warmth of his palm anchoring her courage. Together they mounted, hearts racing, knowing that what lay ahead would test them more than the wild prairie ever could. Behind them, the town began to stir. The preacher had discovered her absence. His face, usually calm and measured, twisted in fury. He stormed out of the chapel, calling for her, demanding obedience. His voice echoed across the wooden buildings, each word a command, a tether pulling at the girl's heart. But she no longer belonged to him, or to anyone else. The cowboy nudged his horse forward, and they rode through the fields, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them. Each gallop of their hooves felt like liberation, a rhythm of defiance that drowned out the preacher's calls. As they rode, she glanced at him. The worry in his eyes mirrored her own, yet there was determination there too, an unspoken promise that he would protect her, come what may. "We can't turn back?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and exhilaration. "We won't," he said. "Not now. Not ever." The town watchers who had gathered along the edge of town gasped as they saw them riding away. Whispers turned to shouts. The preacher's face, framed by the chapel doorway, was a mask of anger and disbelief. Some townsfolk murmured that she had brought shame, others that love had triumphed over tyranny. The girl did not look back. Her heart beat too fiercely to care. Through the hills and across the fields, the two of them rode in silence, the only sounds the pounding of hooves and the whisper of the wind. The cowboy's hand occasionally brushed hers, a quiet reassurance that they were in this together. She felt alive in a way she had never known, free from fear, free from obligation, free to simply exist as herself. Eventually they reached the edge of the prairie, where the land seemed to stretch forever. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder for a moment, letting the gravity of what they had done sink in. "Do you think we'll be safe?" she asked quietly. He smiled, a mixture of reassurance and mischief. "Heaven may judge me, the town may gossip, but we'll be together. That's all that matters." For the first time in her life, she believed it. The preacher's sermons, her parents' expectations, the town's whispers, they were behind her now, like shadows dissolving in the morning light. She was not promised to anyone. She belonged only to herself, and to the man who had dared to see her heart and honor it. As the sun climbed higher, warming their backs, she laughed softly, a sound full of relief and newfound joy. The cowboy chuckled in response, tipping his hat with a playful flourish. It was a moment of triumph, of love declared openly and of freedom seized. They rode on, the horizon stretching endlessly before them, a canvas of possibilities. No one could predict what lay ahead, but they faced it together, hearts intertwined, courage unshaken, and in that vast open land beneath the endless sky, she finally understood. True love is not bound by promises made by others, nor by fear, nor by duty. True love is chosen, fought for and embraced with every beat of the heart. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, painted with gold and soft rose as the sun climbed higher into the morning sky. The townsfolk remained behind, trapped in their whispers and judgments, while the young woman and the cowboy rode freely across the prairie, hearts pounding, spirits soaring. Every gallop of the horse beneath her felt like a heartbeat in sync with her own, a rhythm of liberation and love. For the first time in her life, she was unbound. The preacher's voice, the town's gossip, the heavy weight of promises, none of it could reach her here. She glanced sideways at the cowboy, his rugged face softened by the morning light, his eyes bright with determination and warmth. She had chosen him, and in that choice she had found herself. "You kept your word," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You promised you'd be here, and you were." He gave a small smile, tipping his hat playfully. "Always, and I always will be. Let heaven judge me if it must, but I want you. And nothing else matters." Her heart swelled. The words once whispered in the secrecy of the night now carried across the fields, strong and unafraid. In the freedom of their flight, she realized how tightly the preacher's grip had constricted her life. She had been a bird with clipped wings, told to sing only when permitted. And now for the first time she was allowed to soar. The prairie welcomed them. The wind tugged at her hair and clothes, as if urging them forward, as if celebrating their courage. The cowboy guided her horse beside his, steady and confident, every movement reinforcing the promise that he would not let anyone take her from him. Together, they became a living testament that love could defy expectation, defy rules, and defy even the most pious threats of judgment. Somewhere in the distance, the town continued its routines, oblivious to the revolution of hearts that had occurred in the quiet hours of dawn. The preacher had no power here. His sermons, his warnings, and his commands were irrelevant in the vast openness of the land. The girl was free, and the cowboy was there to ensure that her freedom was defended and cherished. They rode in silence for a while, letting the sound of hooves against the earth replace words. Then she spoke, voice soft but resolute. Do you think we'll ever be able to return?" He shook his head slowly, not with fear but with honesty. "Perhaps not. Perhaps they'll never forgive. But we don't need their approval. We have each other, and that is enough." She smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The fear, the guilt, the endless expectations, they no longer held sway. What mattered was the love they had chosen, the bond forged in secrecy and courage, and the promise to face whatever came together. As the day warmed, they found a small clearing, a place where the river shimmered like liquid glass. They dismounted, letting the horses graze while they took in the serenity of the moment. She rested her head against his shoulder, letting herself finally relax. Here, under the endless sky, she felt safe, cherished, and alive. "You made the right choice," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You chose yourself, and you chose love." "I was promised to him," she said quietly, thinking of the preacher, of the town, of all the chains she had escaped. "But you made me realize what it means to be free." He kissed her forehead gently, a promise of protection and devotion. "And we will face whatever comes together. Nothing can take that from us." For hours they sat by the river, letting the world continue without them. In the distance, the prairie stretched endlessly. A reminder that life was vast, that love was bold, and that the heart once freed could never truly be caged again. As twilight approached, painting the sky in purple and amber, the girl felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges awaited, the preacher's wrath, the town's whispers, the harshness of life on the frontier, they would face them together. And for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. The narrator's voice, soft and cinematic, carries the closing thought. Some said their love was reckless, others called it sinful. But in the vast openness of the prairie, beneath the endless sky, their hearts had chosen freedom, courage, and each other. And sometimes love is worth defying heaven itself. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with the image of two figures riding into the horizon. Hearts intertwined, unbound and fearless, a symbol of hope, courage, and love that cannot be constrained.